Welcome to the Patrick Coffin Show. My guest is Senator Rick Santorum from Pennsylvania, multiple time congressman, twice ran for president of the United States, senator from the great state of Pennsylvania. And this is a conversation that's going to be pretty heavily censored. We're going to get into issues that social media tech doesn't really like hearing. So if you want the full, unexpurgated, unfiltered, uncensored conversation, go to the True North movement. That's inside patrickcoffin.media. That's the place to go to connect with people around the world who care about restoring the culture. So patrickcoffin.media is the place to be. Senator Rick Santorum, from Italian extraction at age 32, he became a congressman with the U.S. House of Representatives back in the 90s. He ran successfully to be a U.S. senator in 2012 and 2016, ran for president. Senator Santorum, great to see you.
Thank you, Patrick. Good to be with you.
Let's press rewind if I could. And I'm always curious about what motivates someone to pull the trigger from nice life, beautiful wife, family, attorney, and then let's run for public office. Were you influenced by someone at the time to step up, seeing a vulnerability that maybe you could win?
Yeah, not really any of those things. First off, I wasn't married when I decided to run. I got married the year I ran for Congress, and yeah, I had a good life, but I'd always been interested from my time in college and afterwards. I'd been interested in politics and I actually went to work as a staff person for a state senator, and so I felt like even though I was a lawyer, that really my calling was to be involved in the political world. That I really didn't like being a lawyer. I felt like at best I was social. I was doing socially neutral things, and I always felt this. I'm a son of an immigrant, and felt like. And my, father and mother sort of pounded home what a great blessing it was to be an American and to serve. And I never served in the military, so I sort of felt this was sort of almost like a public service type of thing, and grateful for not being from another country and not have, and having the great this great country you wanted to continue, and candidly, what I was seeing. In the time when I was growing up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, the country was changing, and in ways that I thought were not necessarily positive. And I felt like that I needed to step in there and see what I could do to restore the kind of society, not just government, but really broader than that. I think if you look at most of the stuff I did when I was in Congress, most of the things that I was known for were more cultural than they were others. I mean, I got involved in national security and economics and all that kind of stuff I did, but what I uniquely sort of brought to the equation, and I knew at the time there was a dearth of this, which are people who were willing to stand up and fight for the soul of the country. There were lots of conservatives who were willing to fight for economic growth and for Reaganomics. At the time, that was still a very big thing when I first got into politics. There were folks who wanted to have a strong national security and be strong militarily. There were lots of folks who were taking lead on that. There are very, 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 very few who wanted to stand up to the cultural decay that was going on in the country and government's complicity with it. So that's in the end what I guess motivated me to move forward and to make a difference.
And it's always a minority who have the ear of the legacy media. It's never, more than 50% want to redefine marriage. More than 50% are either trans or sympathetic. It's the same. It's not the same individuals necessarily, but it's always that. It's like the rudder on a giant cruise ship. That rudder controls the direction of the entire ship. And people, we have groupthink. People are afraid to stand up and say the
Yeah.
word no. Did you have people coming to you back channel, giving you high fives in private, but wouldn't ally with you publicly?
Not many. No, the people who high fived me were folks who were, with me and publicly with me. But no, most of the folks who voted. I'll never forget. I forced the only vote in the United States Senate to have marriage defined as a union between a man and a woman in the Constitution. Now I knew it wasn't going to pass, wasn't going to get 50 votes, but I felt like it was important to have the debate and to go on record. And if you go back and read that debate, you'll find that most of the people who opposed it were folks who said, "Oh, you're just a hater. All you're trying to do is show that you hate these people. And this is not a real threat. This is not nothing's going to happen. You're just, this is not a real problem, and you're just all you're doing is just showing that you hate gay people." And of course, the people who were saying that all knew exactly what was going to happen. They all knew that they just needed to get this in, that the courts doing their bidding, which they have done historically, will normalize this. The media will embrace it, normalize everything, and eventually, the feckless folks who stand for traditional values will who control no levers of power. We used to control, in a sense, the church used to be that lever of power. They've been completely discredited, or they've gone to the other side. Many churches have, and the church, the Catholic Church. I mean, it's not a coincidence that the church's scandals, were at a time when this cultural revolution was going on to discredit the church from speaking into it. I mean, this scandal of the church has been going on for, frankly, decades, but the timing of it just seemed to be propitious when the church was the sole body out there to speak against this cultural transformation, and they too were discredited to the point where they couldn't. Even if they did, they wouldn't be paid attention to.
It's totally true. The church doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's also a part of enmeshed in this fallen culture.
Yeah,
There's a playbook for all this. I don't know if you've heard of the book After the Ball.
of
It
course.
came, yeah. So Hunter Madsen and Marshall
Yeah,
Kirk. One is a Madison
yeah.
Avenue guy,
Like I
died of
said,
AIDS. Yeah. So
all you have to do is, like I said, I have this gift of looking to what they say they're going to do and believe them,
mm,
right? And they're not done. Everyone thinks, oh well, it's not going to get no. It will continue to descend into the depths of you know
mhm.
depravity.
1965 to me was a really liminal tectonic shift year in American culture. It was the end of Vatican II. It was the last time that a musical, rated G musical, won the best feature film Oscar, Sound of Music. And it was the year that Griswold versus Connecticut was decided. For the first time in US history, you could sell and advertise and market contraceptives. Now, this is a Protestant America that passed these Comstock laws. How do you see the passage of Griswold and the invented right to privacy as a fulcrum or a foundation for Roe v. Wade and everything else that's happened since?
No, I think you're absolutely correct, and in fact, I've talked about it a lot, and during my political career, to my detriment. There's no question, and I've said this publicly, that there's no right to privacy in the sense of with respect to your sexual behavior, in the sense that that the government can license certain activity. I always say that you know, can people do within their bedroom what consent is? Sure. I mean, I don't want the government going in there and policing sexual activity, but at the same time, there's a difference between that and what the law says is right or wrong, right? And so I don't want a law against sodomy. Because it's an unenforceable law, and I don't want to enforce it, and I don't think we should enforce it. But in the case of Griswold, the reality is that they created a right to privacy, and that right to privacy didn't end, and would never have ended with just this. Am I for contraception? No, I am not. I'm a Catholic. We don't support that. Am I for a law that bans contraception? No, I am not, because we are a pluralistic society, and the vast majority of the American public supports the contraception. And we're a republic, and we those the laws reflect the will of the people, and that doesn't mean I'll support it, and I won't. But that means that a society should reflect that, good or bad. Um, the problem with Griswold is it wasn't a decision by the Congress, which could say, okay, we're going to allow contraception, but that doesn't mean we're going to allow something else, because it's each of these things are independent decisions. When you make a vote on an issue, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to support something else. The problem with Griswold is when you create a legal construct that says that you have this right, then there are certain arguments legally that flow from that. And that was the problem with Griswold. It opened up Pandora's box. It wasn't an isolated decision, say, oh, we're only doing this. No, because you had legal rationale for you to do so. And that legal rationale creates precedent, and that precedent is then used to allow other types of behavior. Where if it's done legislatively, well, you can, legislators can have a rationale for doing something and have a different rationale for a different one when it comes to another issue. That's not the way the law works. That's not the way court cases work. And so I made that same argument when it came to Lawrence versus Texas, which was one of the cases that was decided when I was in Congress. I was in the Senate and got into a firestorm of trouble and became, at that moment, my argument against, prior to the decision coming out, argument against them creating the right to consensual sexual activity. Because prior to that, it was within marriage that was protected, but now we have the right to engage in any kind of sexual activity and licensed by the government, if you will. That would open up Pandora's box to gay marriage and a whole host of other things that we have seen, which it did. And I said those things, and I said, look, I'm not saying we should that because this was a sodomy law. I said we shouldn't. I don't agree with the Texas sodomy law. I don't think there should be a sodomy law. It's not something the government can police. But that doesn't mean that we have. Yeah, Lawrence.
Yeah.
And I said that doesn't mean that we have to have a court case that rules against it. Let the legislature and the people work this out. Let the Congress work this out. When the court does it, you set a legal justification for it, then is then used as, and again, these are all progenies of Griswold, that is then used to further expand what I consider to be the destruction of the culture. And so, yeah, it's a nuanced argument that is lost on people, because I get accused all the time of being against this and against that and wanting to ban this and wanting to ban that, when in fact not everything that is immoral should be illegal. We don't have laws against fornication, right? We don't have laws against a lot of things that the Catholic Church and most people believe are sinful behavior, because it's not the role of the government to police people's sins. It is the role of the government to protect folks from each other and other types of things, but it's not involved in every moral decision. And so that's something that's lost, and it's something that candidly most politicians are just afraid to deal with, so they just punt and just say, oh, just I don't want to have to talk about these things because they make me uncomfortable, and now you see why.
Or it's tagged as negative, and God forbid someone be negative in front of the
Right,
camera.
you're trying to restrict my behavior. Well, yes,
Yeah.
in fact, that's what laws do.
Yeah.
Laws set out, right and wrong.
I grew up under the shadow of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who famously said back in the 60s that the government has no business in the bedrooms of the nation. And this is before he gave Canada the equivalent of Roe v. Wade. So it's all the dominoes have fallen.
Yeah, of course, the reality is abortion doesn't happen in the bedroom. And that's the whole point, is that they make up these false arguments that, well, we shouldn't be policing this. We're not policing. Abortion doesn't police anybody's sexual behavior. What it polices is, what do you do as a result of that behavior? And now you have a human life involved, and the government has a role in protecting human life, period. That's what it's about. It's not about the bedroom. It's not about what you do. It's about what you do sexually. It's about the consequences of your actions. and that is something that the government can and should police.
I wrote a book about this. My first book's called The Contraception Deception, and the
Yeah.
logic is inexorable. If you can decouple, so to speak, love and life from the marital act, you can't argue against any subsequent sexual perversion.
Right.
You've taken yourself out of the of consistency, and people don't understand. I'll just linger on contraception for a minute. Jordan B. Peterson, not Catholic. Raquel Welch, may she rest in peace, not Catholic. Sigmund Freud, Gandhi, George Orwell, they were all opposed to contraception. So this is not a Catholic dogma thing. This has to do with the natural moral law, which anyone can know if they open their eyes a little, wide enough.
Yeah, the problem is it just restricts your personal freedom, and now sex is the highest and greatest good, and so that's the government can't restrict something that's such an innate and intrinsic good, when in fact it is it is not the highest and greatest good, and yet because we have a society that is uh, diverted its eyes from heaven to down between your legs, and that's not a society that's going to do well.
What's the difference between the American ideal of liberty, which is redefined by, say, libertarian types as the freedom to do whatever you want, as opposed to freedom, which is the more Christian ideal of doing what you ought?
Yeah. Yeah. I wrote a book back in 2004 or five, which is called It Takes a Family. And I wrote it in response to Hillary Clinton's book, It Takes a Village. And I wrote at that time, I talked about, freedom. I had a whole chapter on freedom. And I defined the less freedom as no fault freedom. Right, as you described, that freedom is to do whatever I want to do. And of course, that was not the founder's vision of freedom. The founder's vision of freedom was to do what you ought to do, what John Paul II, laid out very, very beautifully. Uh, and the reality is, that you go back. I say this in the book, and I went back and looked at the founding document, which is the Declaration, and they talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And what people don't realize is that the definition of happiness today we think of it, well, happiness is just pleasure or joy or feel. That's not how the founders viewed happiness. If you look at the closest proximate definition that I could find was Webster's dictionary, which came in like 30, 40 years after the founding. But one of the principal definitions of happiness is to do what the Lord has laid out as the right thing to do. That the understanding at the time was that doing the Lord's will would lead to happiness. Everything else leads to a problem. If it's actions which are consonant with God's will in your life and God's moral laws that will ultimately lead to happiness. And that was the understanding of happiness. It was doing what was in sync with God's will. So it's really life, liberty, and the pursuit of God's will is what our founding fathers understood to be the role of a just of a just government in a good society, and we have completely abandoned that to replace with this secular humanist idea that happiness is about self gratification and pleasing the real true God, which is you.
Right, right, right. Did you grow in your devotion to the Catholic faith of your childhood? Did marriage
No,
kind of supercharge or no?
no. I give long testimonies about how really I didn't really come to my Catholic faith. I mean, I was raised a Catholic and altar boy and all that stuff, but I was more of a cultural Catholic than anything else. When I went to college, I sort of abandoned it, didn't go to church, and really was like that for until I got married. And really, my wife and I sort of found the church together. She was a sort of a same kind of castaway Catholic at the time, and it wasn't until we got married and we within a few months got pregnant, and we sort of came to this realization: hey, we've got another soul to worry about, not just ours, and we've got to get our act together here. And we started doing that as we were dating because we sort of thought we were going to get married, and now this sort of phase of my life was over, and now it's time to get time to grow up. as we used to say. And that's when it sort of came about. And really, it sort of jumped more on the scene as when I became a senator. And I was out of this every 2 years running for my life in Congress and then for the Senate. I had a moment to sort of take a step back. I was 36 and say, okay, I'm a 36-year-old United States senator. I got a couple of kids, and why am I here? I mean, I had no business being here. I mean, the story of my electoral success is miraculous, and so I sort of felt all this, and that's when I had a couple of things happen to me. I had a great pastor here that I went to church in Northern Virginia when I was here, and who really opened my eyes to a lot of things, named Jerome Fasano, and then the chaplain of the Senate, a guy named Lloyd Ogilvie, who was a Presbyterian minister, was just a powerful, powerful spiritual leader, and those two guys really had a lot to do with sort of forming me and sort of creating the courage, candidly, to at that point go out and fight these battles.
A lot of the content of my commentaries and interview guests and all the things I do on YouTube have to be heavily censored by me. To get the full iteration, unfiltered, uncensored, go to the True North Movement. That's patrickcoffin.media. You'll find an extra episode. You'll find all the activities around the water cooler, our main community chat. We do books, we do movies, we do culture, faith, and reason. So get the entire conversation, uncensored from YouTube. Go to patrickcoffin.media.